Okay, so here we are doing the video for the an analysis of the data for Lab 2. So I'm going to start with a blank sheet here, and I may pause the video to enter data, but I wanted to just show you how you can do certain things in Excel. So first thing I'm going to do is, if you go down to the bottom corner here, you'll see there's a plus minus sign. So if you do plus, what it does is it zooms in so the numbers are bigger. Everything is bigger. Okay, so I'm just going to duplicate the data off of one of the students. So the first column was run number, and if you have a sequence of numbers, instead of entering them in manually, you can enter in the first two numbers, and if there's a certain pattern, it'll maintain that pattern. So for example, if I put 1 and 2, I highlight the two cells, then I go down to the lower right hand corner and I stretch it, it will fill in with the numbers that are appropriate. Now if you wanted to do, say 1, 3, 5, 7, odd numbers, you could put the first two odd numbers in and do the same thing. Highlight them, grab the corner, and it'll do that. If you do dates, if you put in a date, okay, we haven't talked about dates yet, and I'm not going to do everything here, but I'm going to do this one. If you go to, where am I going here? Actually, if you highlight the cells that you're interested in formatting, so I'm going to highlight these cells, then you put your cursor inside those cells and right click. You'll see format cells somewhere. And what this does is it allows you to format the cells, as the name implies. So here are the different ways. Now normally it's numbers, but it could be currency. The other one may be date. So if I choose date, and then you can put in what kind of format you want, how you want the date to be represented. So let me say month/day. Okay, so now if I come back to the top and I put whatever today's date is, 9/9, and I push 9/10, so those are day in sequence, then I can highlight those two cells and then drag it, and you can see it's going to fill in the date. So for 10 numbers it's not that big of a savings, but if you had hundreds of numbers, hundreds like years, hours, it'd be a lot easier to just enter the first two numbers and then drag it. Okay, let's go back and change this back. So I'm going to change the formatting back to, I think the default is general. Okay, so we're going to put 1 and 2. We're going to highlight those two cells, grab the corner, drag down until we get to 10. Okay, now that I've added everything in here, notice how the title is overrunning the next cell. So I'm going to go between the two cells up here, between A and B. Notice how it changes from a down arrow to a two-sided arrow situation. And then if you double click on that, it'll make the cell as wide as the widest cell in that column. You could also just go to between the two cells and just drag it like this if you want it to be even bigger. But I'm going to just double click between them so that it's wide enough to show run number. But now you can also format them where the numbers are centered to the left or to the right. That's using the alignment feature up here. Okay, and then we have 3 runs. So I'll say acceleration cart 1, acceleration cart 2, acceleration cart 3. So all of those are a little bit wide, need to be a little bit wider. So I'll just double click. Okay, now I'm going to enter the data. So all you do there is just manually enter. There's no easy, quick way. So I'm going to pause while I enter the data. Okay, so I've entered the data. Now, anytime you enter the data manually, you should go back and double check that you got them incorrectly, entered correctly. So I'm going to just look back and forth between the table and the Excel file and make sure I did it right. I'm leaving it up here just to emphasize that you got to do this because you can make a mistake and you wouldn't notice it. A lot of times, if it's a number that looks way out of what you would expect, then you'd go back and check it out. But I would go through every data point. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to highlight all these numbers because notice that if I put 2.30 in there, it truncates it down to 2.3. So I like them for all to have 2 digits to the right of the decimal point. So I highlight the data, I right click, I pick format cells, I pick number and decimal places. So I want 2 decimal places. So now you can see it looks nicer because all the 2.3s become 2.30. Okay, well let's do some statistics on these columns. So I'm going to write what the columns represent, actually what the rows represent. So we'll do the mean and we'll do the standard deviation. Okay, so those formulas, a lot of them we use in science and engineering are pretty much the same. Mean, standard deviation. You could have median as well. Let's put that in there. Median. Okay, so here are the formulas. Mean, M-E-A-N. And actually, it's average because it didn't show up. So when you type it in, it gives you a list of the possible choices here. So it's just a plain average. You put the left parenthesis. You can put in the cells. So let me just show you. You could say B2 colon B11. And you can see that it highlights the cells that I'm interested in. So you put the first cell, the last cell, and it'll do all the ones in between when you do a colon. So that's one way to do it. Notice if I did D11, it would now highlight all 3 of those rows. But that's not what I want to do. Okay, let's go back here. What I usually do is I do equals average. Notice you always have to do an equal sign when you're using a formula. Equal average, left parenthesis, and then I just highlight this data and then a right parenthesis. So it automatically puts in the parenthesis. Actually, it puts in the range of data. Now, rather than writing that out again, I can copy the formula. Notice the formula says average B2 colon B11. Okay. Now, if I highlight this cell for the mean or the average and I drag it to the right, it's going to copy the formula and it's going to increment the cells. So it's C2 through C11, which is what I want on this column, and the next one would be D2 through D11. So it will automatically adjust for that. Okay, so those are the means. You can see they're pretty close to each other. Equals STDEV. So that's the simplest standard deviation. Left parenthesis, highlight the data, not including the mean, right parenthesis. So that's my standard deviation. If I drag that, click on the cell, drag it to the right, I get that. Now, one thing, there's a lot of data points that I don't need. It's too many data points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to round it off to 3 decimal points, I think. Okay, so let's highlight them, right click, format cells, number, 3 decimal places. Okay, so that's a lot easier to look at. And the median, the formula is median. Okay, left parenthesis, highlight the 10 cells, right parenthesis, 2.29, highlight the cell, copy it to the right. And you see in this case, the median and the mean are the same, which happens when you have normal data. So now the question would be a couple of questions. Did it look like there's a difference in the values for the three different carts for this instance? So we can see that the means are, the first and the third carts are the same, and the second cart is just slightly higher. But if you look at the standard deviation, you know, that is that's the standard deviation of the sample. And then you could do the standard deviation of the mean, which would be less than that. That's going to be dependent upon the sample standard deviation and like the square root of the number of samples, I think. So I think I'm not doing a complete analysis here. You know, it's not a statistics class, but you could use these pieces of information, and you probably find out that that these are not statistically different. As far as number of significant figures, it looks like you could use 3 significant figures for this data easily, because you can see the standard deviation is in the thousandths place, and we're here, if we have 3 significant figures, we are to the hundredths place. So I think that would mean that it's probably a good 3 significant figure result. Okay. Now what else can we do? Let me pause, think about it. Okay, the next thing, let's put the 2 angles that we have. We'll do the measured angle and the calculated angle. Notice they're a little wide, so we're going to go up here to the cell, between cell F and G, and double click. Okay, we're actually going to put the numbers right here. So the measured angle, most everybody had them to just 2 digits. So I have 14 degrees. And the calculated 13.47 degrees. Okay, so those are the angles. Now those are in degrees, so I'm going to go to the next cell over and put in the units. And I probably should do that over here. So how could we do that? Well, let's insert a row. Let's insert some space here. So if I highlight those 4 cells and I right click and I say insert and I shift cells down, what that does is it leaves a little extra space up there. Now the reason I didn't insert a row, because then those 2 would be separated and I'd have to redo that. So I'm going to put the units in here. So MS, you can do superscripts here, I think. Where are the superscripts? Click here, superscript 2. Okay, that's good. And I don't need to rewrite that. I can just copy that. So I'm going to click on the cell, grab the corner, pull it over. Oh, that's interesting. I guess you can't do that. Okay, let's delete those. Now another way of doing it, what it did was it incremented that number, surprisingly. I would not have expected that. Okay, another way of doing it is you could do copy and paste. So you go to copy. I tend to use the shortcuts, Control-C to copy. So I do Control-C, and then I would highlight these 2, and I would use Control-V. In that case, it just copies it exactly. And the standard is that letters are formatted to the, or what do you call that? justified, maybe aligned to the left, numbers to the right. So I may want to move these to the right. So I'm going to highlight these 3 cells, go over here to alignment. Here's the line left, line center, line right. So I'm going to line right. Just makes it look a little better. Okay, so I've done that. Anything else? Oh yeah, we're going to calculate the G from measure, I'm using abbreviations here, G from calculation. Okay. So let us do the formula. So we said it was, you take the acceleration from the measurements, so we'll take the mean value here, and we're going to divide by the sine of this angle. So we're going to say equals, let's pull this down a little bit, equals the mean value, meters per second squared, divided by the sine of the angle. Now the problem is that Excel does radians, it doesn't do degrees. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take this angle measurement, 14 degrees, and we're going to have to convert it to radians. So to do that, you multiply by pi. Now the notation for pi is pi, and then you do the left and right parenthesis. So there's nothing inside there. It's like the other functions except there's no argument. And then you divide by 180, and then you do a right parenthesis. So you can see it's taken the acceleration, divided by the sine of the angle, 14 degrees, but converting it to radians. And I push enter, and it should be close to 9. Okay, so you get 9.46. Now, let me do something, and it's not going to be right, but I'm going to show you what happens. So you say, okay, I want to copy that. So I'm going to use this value here. So I'll just copy this thing over. And you get this junk, value, hashtag values, exclamation. Okay, so let's undo that. So what happened was it incremented so that the equation, instead of saying B13, it would say C13. But the problem is it's using these, it would move to the next cell over. So it would use degrees. And then if it moved it over again, it would use blank. Okay, so that's no good. So what we need to do is we need to increment this value referenced in the formula, but not to change these. So the way you do that, you'd say equals, pick this column. Well, actually, let's go back to the previous one because we're going to copy this. So we've highlighted this thing right here. Now, if you want the cell to not change when you move it, copy it somewhere else, you have to use dollar signs. So I want to keep this number the same and just change the mean. So to do that, let's go back to the median formula, the G formula. And going up here, you'll see it says B13 divided by the sine of G1. So what we want to do is put dollar sign G, dollar sign 1. So that means always use 14, but you can change the other part of the equation. So we get the same number here. It doesn't affect that one at all. But if I now copy it, you can see everything looks good because it still uses 14 degrees in all of those cases. But it uses 2.29, 2.30, and 2.29. Notice that these are not exactly the same because what we did here is we didn't round off. We just truncated it. So this one actually is not exactly the same as that one, but 3 significant figures it is. So the same thing applies here, except we're going to have to rewrite the formula again because if I copied this down, everything would be fine about these other two numbers, but this one would get moved to there, and that wouldn't work. So we have to re-enter the formula. So we're going to say equals, pick the mean value, divide by the sine of this. Now I have to go back and put these dollar signs in. Now there is a shortcut. If you push F4, it'll put the dollar signs on. If you push F4 again, it'll take one of the dollar signs off. Do that, it'll take the other dollar sign off. And then if you do again, it'll take both the dollar signs off. So it kind of goes through the sequence. And then if you do it again, it'll put the dollar signs in. So that's F4. Okay, so you multiply by pi, 2 parentheses, divided by 180, right parenthesis. And I did something wrong there apparently. Oh, because I used the wrong, it should have been G2, not G1, so let's fix that. So I'm going to go up here, click on that top row, G2, not G1. Okay, there we go, 9.82. Okay, now we should just be able to copy this thing over. So grab the corner, spin it over. And then finally, I'm going to highlight these 6 cells, right click, go to format, choose number, and show 2 decimal points. Okay, so in this case, from the trigonometry, geometry, we got a number pretty close to 9.8 something. But not everybody's going to get that good agreement. Okay, so that is that. And one last thing, even though in this case we don't really need to do it because the numbers are not that different, but I'm going to show you how to create a bar graph. So the way you do that is you'd go Insert, you go over here to these charts, and we'd pick this one here. It says Insert Column or Bar, and you have all these different choices. I usually do column. This is usually the kind that you would do. Now the problem is it's going to automatically choose the data, which is not really what I want, but we can quickly fix that. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And it's made a lot of decisions on its own, which is not always a good thing. So we're going to go up to here to select data, and we're just going to remove everything. So we just kind of start with a blank slate. Okay. Now we still have a bar graph, so that's what we were kind of looking for. Now if I put add, that's going to be the values of the different choices. Well, the 3 choices are cart 1, cart 2, and cart 3. So if you go here and click and then come down to this and highlight B, C, and D. Unfortunately, the graph is in the way, but you can see. So that should work. Push enter. You see there's 3 bars now. Now we could give it a name, but we could say it's acceleration. Okay. Now, what else are we going to do? Well, notice we've got acceleration here on the left-hand axes. We've got cart 1, cart 2, cart 3. But if we wanted to do cart numbers here, what would we do? Well, we could go here to the horizontal axis label and say edit. And we would have to pick a name. So we could do these 3 at the top and say, okay, so now it says acceleration cart 1, acceleration cart 2, acceleration cart 3. So that looks pretty good. Let's say okay right now. Okay, so we got something that's starting to look like it's decent. Now I want to move this to another separate sheet because it's kind of included with the data. Now you could move it over here out of the way so that you could see both the data and the chart. So that would be acceptable. So we could do that. Or we could click on the chart, right click on the chart and do move chart, and then put it in a new sheet and say OK. So now you have a nice separate page. So you've got a sheet that's called chart 1, which is our chart. You've got sheet 1, which is the data. Let's go ahead and change the names of these tabs. So the way you change the names is you go down here and double click on the tab, and I would just call this data, okay, and then enter. And then you do the same thing here. Go to chart, double click. We'll say bar graph. Okay, so that's how you change the names. Data, bar graph. Now it automatically picks the scale here, which I don't necessarily like. I don't want to do that because you can, it looks like there's a huge difference between these two, and it's just because of the scaling. We'll come back to that. One thing we could get rid of, because we only have one thing we're measuring or presenting, is acceleration. So we could click on the acceleration button on the bottom, push just delete because it's kind of in the way. Then you could go down here to, notice it'll highlight, it'll tell you what's going to do, what you're going to be working on. This is vertical value axis. This one says horizontal axis. So let's click on that. And what that does is it highlights these horizontal labels. So they're kind of small. So let's go up here to the font size and make it say 14. So you can see now you can see those things a little bit better. We could do the same thing on the right-hand side, left-hand side. So click on the number. Notice it highlights all the numbers. If we go up here to font, pick 14. So those are big. The next thing is we might want a better title. So let's click on the title. And if you click inside there, you can see the cursor sits. So I could say acceleration of a cart on a 14-degree ramp. Okay. So that gives a little more description to what we're looking at. So we've got a title, we've got titles for the different categories. I want to change the scaling on the vertical axis. So let's click on the numbers and then right click and format axis down here at the bottom. So we formatted the font. What we're going to do is we're going to change the bounds here. So let's just go from 0 to 2.5. 2.5. Okay. So there you'd look at it and you'd say, well, they don't hardly look any different. And that's true. They aren't that much different. You can see it's changed the increment on the left-hand side. So the first one was showing too much change. This one might be showing not enough change because you can't even see that there's any difference. And there is a very small difference. So, you could try something like from 2 to 2.5 instead. So let's do that. So we'll click on the number here for the axis. Right click, format axis. And let's go from 2 to 2.5. See, okay. Now these are the ones that are on auto, so they're going to adjust themselves. So actually update it changed the upper limit, so let's make it 2.5. So both the lower and the uppers are set. The actual increments here are auto scaled. So you can see there's slight difference. And I think if you somewhere here you can actually put the values on the different columns if you wanted to have it so people could see what the actual values were. So let's see if I can figure out how to do that. Let's see if I do that. That's not going to do it. Okay, change the format there. Let's see what else. Labels. Oh yeah, we haven't put in labels on yet. We need to do that. So I'm just trying to see if there's any way to add the axis labels. So I'm going to pause for just a second. Okay, so to add labels to either of the axes, you click on the graph and you see this little plus sign here, chart elements. So it's got axes, it's got chart title, it's got grid lines. In this case, it's got grid lines just in the horizontal direction because it doesn't make any sense to do it in the vertical direction with a bar graph. Finally, what we want is axis titles. So now you can see the box is shown. And so to change them, you can just click inside and you can just delete what's in there. And I could put cart acceleration meters per second. Now I can hardly see that, so I'm going to change the font. So let's click on there and go up here and choose something bigger. Okay, so you can see that better. Cart acceleration, did I spell that right? Yep, cart acceleration meters per second. Per second, I could do using the backspace here. I could use the superscript, put a square on there. Okay, so they've got cart acceleration meters per second squared. And down here, for the x-axis, I could put in a title. So again, I click inside the box. I highlight it, so if I start typing, it'll override that. And you can say cart number. Again, that's kind of small. Let's see what happens if you don't highlight it. If you just go up here and change it, if it changes the numbers, nope. So you either have to highlight the cells and then change the font. So you see that worked. Or you can just click on the whole thing. The cursor's not inside the label. And at that point, I think if you change it, it'll change it for the whole slew of letters in there. But if you click on it and then to click on it again, you can see the cursor's in there, and it's only going to change the font of the ones that you have labeled. So I think that's good. So let's kind of review what we did. We learned about how to enter numbers in sequence without typing them all in. We talked about formatting so that we had consistent number of digits shown. Showed how to get the standard mean, standard deviation, median. We showed how to use formulas where you keep one of the elements fixed, whereas the other ones vary. We talked about how to create a bar graph, how to move it to a separate sheet, how to add axes, titles, change the font size, good stuff like that. Okay, so that's all. So just go ahead and post just like last time. If you upload this Excel file, be able to see everything.